there's kind of an interesting philosophical debate for how to build a football team. Get the quarterback first, then build the team first, then get the quarterback. Giants tried to get the quarterback first, then build the team when they brought in Daniel Jones back in 2019, when their number one receiver was technically Sterling Shepard. I think Benny Fowler was the number two. Their starting tackles were Mike Remmers and somebody who might have been even worse than Mike Remmers. Not a good situation, right? But okay, got the quarterback, then build the roster. Then they kind of messed up on building the roster for the most part, and things didn't go well. Now, they're flipping it around. They're trying to build the roster first, hoping that Daniel Jones somehow works out at this point in like year 6. And if he doesn't, okay, we got the roster in place. Then we get the quarterback next year. Interesting little switcheroo there.
I think they get the quarterback next year no matter what. And some would argue they didn't build the roster and didn't get the quarterback. So that's why they are where they are now. I don't believe Daniel Jones is long for the Giants. Maybe long for the NFL, but not long for the Giants. They're probably going to go a different direction as quickly as they can. A lot of people thought they should have done that this year, but they haven't. So indeed, they're building the base and getting ready for whatever direction they go next year at quarterback.
This time last year when we did the Giants episode, we were oddly optimistic, right? Because it was coming off a decently strong 2022.
Yep.
Some would say they overachieved. They ripped a playoff win off the Vikings, who way overachieved that year, right? Relative to maybe what they should have. And everybody saw that Giants playoff win coming from a mile away because it was against Minnesota. And so, we had some optimism going into last year. And we said, okay, maybe we underestimated the Giants. They clearly hit on the coach. They got the best they could out of Daniel Jones. Maybe this is the start of an upswing. And then everything kind of sort of fell apart in 2023.
Everything. They didn't do positive regression. They did negative regression. And a lot of it reminds me of, tractor trailer back end starts to swing out on some ice and the guy corrects and it swings the other way and then he overcorrects and then it swings the whole thing around. That was kind of us looking at the Giants last year like, no, we think it's going this way. Went the other way, ended up in the ditch.
But what's encouraging is that even though the bottom fell out, they still won 6 games.
Yeah.
Like they actually still had, some fight and some competitiveness to them. I think there's a lot of good parts to this team that we could talk about today. I think they strengthened a lot of the weaker areas of their team this offseason. So even though we were optimistic last year coming off of a year that, maybe they massively overachieved in 2022, even with the optimism last year, I actually like the direction they're going in better now because they're just building the team. And clearly, they gave Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll an opportunity to just build the team, figure out quarterback in the future. We'll cross that bridge when we get there. But lots to talk about today in terms of roster turnover, in terms of schematic changes on the defensive side of the ball, perhaps some really big schematic changes on the defensive side of the ball. A draft class that we liked, a free agency period that we liked. Honestly, Giants, they're going to be okay. Not great, but they'll be okay. So with all that being said, if you're a Giants fan, stick around. Got a lot to talk about. If you're not a Giants fan, too bad. Jay, roll the intro. Welcome back once again to the Bootleg Football Podcast. I'm Brett Coleman. That's EJ Snyder, if you don't know us already. Which, by the way, if this is the first thing you've ever watched from us, which is a Giants season preview in the middle of June, welcome. Where you been all this time? For those of you that are returning, you know how this series works. We go over what happened in 2023. We talk about the 2024 offseason. Then we preview the 2024 regular season to give our best guess of what this team is capable of. We talk about the good, we talk about the bad, we talk about the shit that we just don't know yet, which when it comes to the Giants is a lot.
Here's a little bit there.
We try to be objective, we try to be nuanced, we do our best here. But if you're a Giants fan, if we miss something or if you have some extra context for something we talk about, of course, we encourage you to tell us down below. Before we jump into this, I want to thank our patron saint, Underdog Fantasy, for making this whole series possible. Giving us the means and the funds to fly up here to the South Puget Sound, Anderson Island, sitting out here on the water. It's not quite summer yet, as evidenced by the fact that we're inside. It's kind of a cloudy day, but we've got a little bit of sun, got a little bit of good weather. We'll be back out here in a couple weeks doing a couple more divisions. Ideally, by then it'll be a little bit more sunny, but could not have done this without the support of Underdog Fantasy and without the support of you guys supporting Underdog to encourage them to sponsor our show. So if you're a big fantasy football player this time of year, maybe you're doing best ball drafts, maybe you're using, best ball drafts to get ready for drafting in your home league because Underdog's a good place to do. I guess you can call them mock drafts. I mean, they're not really mock drafts because the leagues count, but that's what makes them good mock drafts is because the leagues count. Everybody cares, and so it's not just like you drafting against 10 people auto drafting. You actually get good substantive mock drafting in. So if you're doing a lot of mock drafts or just a lot of fantasy drafts in general already, of course you can do that over on Underdog Fantasy. Or if you play pick'ems, I'm sorry if you're a Knicks fan watching this, by the way. A little bit of a brutal end of the season. But if you still like to do NBA pick'ems or hockey pick'ems or golf pick'ems or any kind of pick'em you can think of, they even have NFL season-long pick'ems going on right now. You can do all of this on Underdog. So if you're interested, just want to poke around, see what they have to offer, you can check them out, the link in the description below, or on the QR code on the screen if you're watching this on TV, because I know a lot of people watch this series on TV. And if you use our promo code BOOTLEG, you get up to $250 in bonus cash and a special pick in the lobby. So thank you once again to Underdog for supporting us, and thank you to all of you guys for supporting Underdog. With that, EJ, let's talk about 2023 as quickly as humanly possible so that Giants fans don't leave this show.
Yeah, we're not encouraging you to bolt. We'll get through this pretty quickly. In 2023, Giants overall record 6-11. Again, could have been much, much worse. We'll talk about that in some stats below. Rank in the division third, home record 4-4, road record 2-7. Last 5 games 2-3, fairly even. We've got a couple of metrics for you to talk about why and how that happened. The first one is QBS, or quarterback support. It's a metric that Arjun Menon from PFF and I invented this offseason to really talk about all the support a team gives a quarterback in order to win. There's offensive measures.
Jesus Christ, I just looked at the number. Oh my God.
Well,
all right,
spoiler alert.
All right, EJ, continue.
Spoiler alert, it ain't great. So QBS, if you want to know more about it, check the link in the description. We did an entire Twitter thread plus an hour-long live stream talking about how that cake was baked, and you can figure out exactly what's in there. But think of it as a degree of difficulty for NFL teams, and the Giants made it as difficult as they possibly could for themselves. This is a 0 to 100 scale. Worst team in the NFL is a 0. Best team in the NFL is 100. The Giants were the 0. So they put up the Blue Tarski, 0.0.
So you're grading on a curve and they were dead last.
That's correct.
I'm actually not that surprised.
Given that they still won 6 games, which is a hell of a coaching job by Brian Daboll. So from QBS, we go to Power Score, which is metrics we introduced last year. We take 6 categories: rushing offense, passing offense, rush defense, pass defense, points scored, and points allowed. We just assign them their NFL rank. There's no algorithm here. There's no grading. There's no anything else. It's where did they finish relative to their peers in those categories. These numbers ain't great either. Rushing offense, 31st.
Woof.
Passing offense, 28th. Rush defense, 29th. Pass defense, 12th. The lone bright spot among these numbers. Points scored, 30th. Points allowed, 26th. That gives them a power score of 26. Again, power score lower is better. You want to be number 1. That is the 30th overall power score in the NFL from last year. So you've got...
Man, they really did overachieve, huh?
Yeah, they really did. If you're talking about the support they gave their team in QBS at 32nd, power score at 30th, and they still won, a third of their games, that's not bad. So
yeah.
Heck of a job by Daboll and the staff. You said that earlier, to keep them motivated, to keep them fighting throughout the season, to pick off wins where they could. They were opportunistic. I know you don't want to hear that, Giants fans, because they were a tough team to watch. We watched their games too. We understand that sort of disappointment, but given these numbers, They should have been a 2 or 3 win team, and they were a 6-win team.
You know, the little mini Tommy DeVito era, you know, was fun. But the fact that, you know, they were competitive with Tommy DeVito, while, you know, the distillation of these these two numbers, I should say, are a distillation of like every advanced metric that matters, you know, passing EPA, pass defense EPA, pass block efficiency, you know, average separation of receivers, all that kind of stuff. Like these two numbers are, they're not end all be all. We're not trying to say they're end all be all. It's just a snapshot of like, are you good or are you bad as a team? They were not a good team, but they won 6 games. That's why Brian Daboll's still there. That's why Shane is still there, because if you give chefs this talented better ingredients, they're probably going to cook a lot better of a meal. There have been 2 years now, back to back, where with what the roster was, they overachieved. I'm really excited to see what happens now that, you know, I think they're kind of stacking some fun draft classes on top of each other to have a better roster in the future. Like, I don't think 2024 is the year for them. 2025 might be really interesting depending on how they tackle the quarterback situation. And I think there's when we get to the draft, I think there's a discussion to be had about how I think they might attack the quarterback position in 2025, because obviously they're going to. But I think clearly they have the right coach. I think they have the right GM. They're going in the right direction. And if they just have an average team, they're probably going to make the playoffs.
Yeah, it's difficult because patience is not an NFL fan virtue.
Oddly enough, unless the owner is the Mara family, then they can get a little bit too patient sometimes.
True. As a fan of the Giants, it's very difficult to see all these changes and very difficult to acknowledge all the positives, which is they did overachieve. Their coach is a hell of a coach, and we'll talk about the rest of his staff as well. They're a very talented group of football coaches. We like what Joe Shane's done for the past couple of years, but it's still probably not going to happen for them this year, because until you move on from Daniel Jones, we're in, year 6 of the Daniel Jones experiment. He's a known at this point. He is what he is. He's going to be that. It's going to be tough to compete. Your best case scenario for this year that we'll talk about at the end of the show is probably a wee bit better than 2 years ago, which would be a 9, maybe 10 win team at the sort of at the top.
You're shooting for wild card.
It is a rough way to go into the season to say, if we do our very best and we get all the breaks, we're tickling for a playoff spot.
And I think that's what the long-term goal is. It's not to have the upper tier be 6 seed. It's to have, the upper tier of what we're capable of being Super Bowl. Mm-hmm. They're not putting the cart before the horse, I think, for the first time in a while. I think they're building it the right way. Honestly, they're building it the way that teams like Detroit have done it, where it's like, we know we have a lot of work to do. We're not going to try to skip the line. I think maybe they tried to skip the line in a couple past years. I think they're kind of doing it the right way now. Like, let's just get good players. Let's get as many good players as we can. Let's do some smart contracts. Let's not spend our money in dumb ways like the previous front office did. And then, you're going to look up in 3 years and be a damn good football team. So, again, I like that approach. I want to talk about some scheme talk. People always love this section when we throw random numbers at them and try to melt their brains over the course of 10 minutes. But I think the scheme talk is important because it kind of informs a lot of, or maybe just gives context to a lot of the decisions that they've made in free agency and the draft, right? I don't really want to pull from 2023 when it comes to the Daboll offense, because they were just cobbling it together, right? I think 2022 is probably a better year to look at, especially with Daniel Jones coming back, presumably coming back. Like, okay, if DJ's healthy and on the field, what do we think they're going to do? And honestly, Daboll was running the type of offense that I think people think Kyle Shanahan still runs, where it's a lot of zone runs, just a lot of running in general.
Yes,
a lot of play action. They had the 3rd highest play action percentage in 2023, 3rd highest in terms, actually 1st highest. So they were the highest in terms of passes short of the sticks, at 56% of their passes short of the sticks. So a lot of quick game, a lot of, hitting guys in the flat on bootlegs because why stretch the field when we can take the free money and try to get yards after the catch? Like, they did that all the time. Didn't get a whole lot of explosive plays out of it, but they moved the ball forward, and then they just kept running with Saquon and running with Saquon and running with Saquon. They had these long, drawn-out drives that, again, not a whole lot of explosive plays other than what Saquon got them, but it worked, right? It worked.
It did.
Lowest average depth of target in the league at 6.7, which is crazy low. 8th most rushing attempts, like I said. 4th highest explosive run rate, like I said. So is very much a ball control, play action heavy, quick game heavy offense. Lots of running, lots of cutting the field in half with bootlegs so that Daniel Jones didn't have to read the full field. It's just, is the alert open? No. Is the flat open? Yes. You can take the flat while peeking at the mid-level read. If the mid-level read is wide open, you could take it, but generally he didn't. It was just thrown to the flat because it was easy. And this is not a criticism. I'm just saying what it was. Like, that was the offense. It worked. They made the playoffs. They won a playoff game. They're probably going to do it again, if I had to guess. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm just saying what it is.
It's difficult because they had Saquon Barkley. You talked about how run-heavy it was, and they leaned on Barkley's legs. Obviously, they also leaned on Daniel Jones's legs. He ran a lot that year.
Yeah.
In terms of, especially for quarterbacks, and it was effective. Like, it worked. They got it done. They kept the sticks moving, but it was very much a take the air out of the ball offense. Short, controlled throws to half the field, tons of running, and one more time. We're going to run again. Oh, look, we got a first down. Guess what we're going to do? Made for those long drives, clock eating. Also took the ball out of the opposition's hands because they knew they weren't going to score a ton of points that way because of the low explosive pass play rate. They weren't going to get 20 and 40-yard chunks.
Yeah.
So they knew that if their opponents got a couple of those, they were going to be playing catch-up, and they weren't built to play catch-up, so they just ground it out, both in the passing game and in the running game. But they had Saquon Barkley to do that. He's an incredibly dynamic piece of that. He was the workhorse of that attack, both in running and passing. He caught a ton of balls that year, and they don't have him anymore. So it's interesting to figure out how they're going to try and replicate that production if they had the same approach for the offense.
The one key difference, beyond just having ideally better weapons this year, which I think they do, but perhaps a key difference between this year and 2022 is I also think a big reason why they ran so much and why they had so much play action is they knew they could not pass protect that year.
Yeah,
they absolutely could not pass protect.
It's funny when you said tackle the quarterback early, because I'm like, they let their quarterback get tackled all the time.
It's a common event in Jersey that year. Just looking at the offensive line they have on paper, I think they're going to be better at pass pro this year. They should be better at pass pro this year.
They better be better at pass pro this year.
So maybe they could get away with doing kind of more traditional drop back passing and not getting Daniel Jones killed. And hell, maybe that's the unlock. Like, maybe that is the unlock. We'll see.
Not going to hurt.
I mean, he will be hurt less, probably, right? So there are some key differences, but I would say in general, we're probably still going to see that style of offense. Again, not a bad thing. They can make it work. They made it work before.
Yeah, they know how.
But, don't expect a lot of four verts here. That's not what they do. Defensively, this is the big change. You're bringing in Shane Bowen to be the DC. Most recently, he was DC in Tennessee for a few years. So I was kind of looking up, okay, what style is he going to bring to this team, ideally to fix the run defense? The Titans weren't amazing against the run. And I think a lot of it is more personnel for them last year than scheme, because schematically, there's actually a lot of similarities for what Bowen did with Tennessee to what the Patriots did last year, where, hey, we're running nickel and dime 82% of the time. Mm-hmm. It's a lot of 3-3-5 nickel. That's how we stop the run against 12 personnel. It's we are in nickel against 12, but it's 3-3-5. And so we got essentially 3 big defensive linemen on the field, one weak side edge, and then two linebackers that are all coming downhill, right? The Patriots, though, were a lot better at it than the Titans because they just had more weight up front. Like the Titans tried to do it with, a base end that was at 273, if I recall correctly, and their two interior linemen were 305 each. Whether it was Tart or whether it was Pecco, like they maxed out at 305. And their two linebackers were 230 and 240. Compared to that, the Patriots, who had a trio of defensive linemen that were 285, 315, and 330, and then two linebackers that were 250 plus. So they could get away with being dominant against the run from nickel because they just had more weight spread across those five guys. The Titans didn't, so they weren't super good at it. But assuming that Shane Bowen's going to run that same kind of style, a lot of 3-3-5 nickel with the Giants this year, he's got more weight to work with. You got Dexter Lawrence. They signed Jordan Phillips. You got Boogie Basham. If I had to guess, that's going to be the three when they're in that 3-3-5 nickel look that's going to be stopping the run. And then you're going to have Brian Burns as your weak side edge. You're going to have Bobby Okereke and off the top of my head, who was their other linebacker? It was, I wrote it down here.
Micah.
Oh, that's right. Micah McFadden. Right? So you're going to get Micah McFadden. Also coming downhill. Explosive, like really explosive downhill athlete. So even if he runs the exact same, types of personnel packages and types of fronts with the Giants that he did with the Titans, I think it'll work better with the Giants just because of the personnel he's working with. I also think that kind of brings up an interesting discussion about Kayvon. Like, what are we doing with Kayvon, right? Because if they were a nickel that was a lot of 4-2-5 or 2-4-5, however you want to define it,
yeah,
then okay, Kayvon's probably on the field a lot with Brian Burns as both of their edges, but they might only do that in passing downs. If we're talking about like 1st and 10 against 12 personnel, and we're in nickel and we're in 3-3-5. I kind of don't think Kayvon's on the field there. I think Boogie Basham is your 6 technique. Brian Burns is your weak side edge, and they're rotating Kayvon in Brian Burns' spot as a backup to Burns. And then when they're actually rushing the passer, then you bring in Kayvon as the other edge. People are talking about, okay, Kayvon and Brian Burns are going to be working as a duo together all the time. I think it's more of they're rotating with each other at the same spot and probably keeping each other fresh. And if anything, Azeez Ojulari is the one who's just never on the field. That, again, we're all speculating. This is just theory crafting, I guess you want to call it. But just looking at what Shane Bowen did with his fronts in Tennessee versus the personnel that they have with the Giants, I kind of feel like Kayvon might not get as many snaps this year while also potentially doing more with less snaps.
It's possible. And it'll be interesting to see if Bowen mixes any sort of 5-2 stuff in with Burns and Thibodeaux. This is what people want to see is Kayvon and Burns, racing off the edge. So stack your interior 3 with your heavy guys, especially early downs where you're expecting higher possibility of run. Get those guys out wide, get the 2 linebackers behind them, and play a sort of 5-2 as your front, 7, and have both those guys on the field. And then if you want to keep guys fresh, maybe Ojulari is your, racer off the edge in 3rd and long, comes on just to be the speed wheels because that's what he's good at. Mm-hmm. We'll see how that mix happens or whether it is Kayvon backing up Brian Burns at the weak side edge spot and each of them playing, some split of that. My guess is probably 60-40 because you've invested heavily in Brian Burns. You're going to see more of him out there, but that usage will be fascinating. And then who knows, maybe he's got a, NASCAR package where all 3 of those guys are on the field and they're just coming with pure speed, pinning their ears back. And, there's benefits to that as well. It's not necessarily the school he comes from in terms of Shane Bowen, but he's got pieces to work with, and we'll see how he arranges them on the board.
Yeah, I just think if I had to guess, it's more of a Burns with Kayvon rather than Burns and Kayvon, which I know sounds like the same thing, but I don't necessarily think it is. I think Boogie just because Boogie's built to be like that 6 technique. I think Boogie's going to get more snaps than people think. I think Kayvon's going to get less snaps than people think. I think BJ's going to get way less snaps than people think. Well, Brian Burns is like the guy on the weak side edge. Suffice to say, I think it's going to work. Like, I absolutely think it's going to work.
A lot of good players there. A lot of high investments from the draft.
Right? You know, and like they took a couple corners or a couple DBs, I should say, that we really like in the draft, and we'll get to the draft in a little bit. But like schematically, I see fits here, and I know sometimes I can kind of get lost a little bit too in that lens where I focus too much on scheme and not enough on players. But this is one of those teams where it's like, looking at the players, I can see the scheme. Like, I can see what they're going to do just based on Bowen's history. And I'm like, you know what? This is probably going to be good.
It's better going into a season having that kind of alignment where you can see that, as opposed to saying, hey, this is apples and oranges, round peg, square holes. I don't see how this is going to fit with what a guy's done traditionally. So either we're going to be cramming his style by saying, hey, you don't get to do what you did and were successful with at your last stop, which always seems like a rough way to bring a coach in. Or, hey, players, you're going to have to try and be and do things that you aren't. And that also is a rough way to get into a season. So it's a lot better to be able to go, no, at the beginning, I can see what he likes to do, what he's done in the past, and what he's been successful with. And if you sprinkle this level of talent in there, because there's a lot of talent on this defense. We're going to talk about that. They've been spending high picks on this defense for years. And, you know, now they got Brian Burns from another team who was a high pick. And they just add him to that mix. And there's a lot of talented dudes on this defense. They're not short of horses.
Why don't we get to the coaching staff at large? Because we've talked about Dable, we've talked about Bowen, we've mentioned Shane. Let's just rip the Band-Aid off and go through the entire group, because like looking at the assistants, looking at the coordinators, looking at the guys that are in charge at the top of the org chart, I really, really like the collection of coaching and front office talent they have here. It's probably the most confident I've been in them organizationally in quite a while.
Joe Schoen at the top. We like what he's done since he's taken over, really. He had a job to do to rebuild this roster. He's been doing it, I would say, very effectively. We're big fans of his draft work. And it feels like the handshake between he and Dable, they did come in together. They had some familiarity before they got there, is strong. And that's what the most successful NFL teams have, is a strong handshake between GM and head coach. Feels like they have that. We've talked about Dable. One amazing year, one less than amazing year that kind of was low-key amazing if you were still looking at the end of the season.
All things considered.
That's right. Coordinators Mike Kafka as the OC, again, did an amazing job, almost a magician's job with what they had 2 years ago. Last year did the best he could with what was left. The fact that he made Tommy DeVito look like an NFL quarterback for short stretches is pretty amazing to me. I followed DeVito's work in college and was like, oh boy, Giants fans are really in for it. And there were some fun sections. They won some games. That's a credit to Dable and Kafka.
I also want to mention, by the way, we know there are stretches where Dable took over play calling. We don't know when those were. We don't know what the dynamic is there. All we know is Dable never called out Kafka in public. I know reporters were kind of, and even us, were kind of looking at, him on the sidelines where it's like, okay, well, clearly he's calling plays.
Yeah, he's got a sheet and a headset,
sheet, right?
And his mouth is moving.
But I really respect the fact that Dable never threw Mike under the bus. Like, again, he's a young offensive coach. He's a young play caller in his own right. They're bringing him along. I have to assume Mike's going to be calling the plays going into this year. And if things get a little shaky, Dable will probably, step in and help out. But I really respected that Dable never called Kafka out in public like some previous Giants coaches would have thrown their assistants under the bus, and some other coaches around the NFL that we see routinely throw assistants under the bus when they think their job isn't safe. Like, Dable never stooped to that. And Dable has had disagreements with his assistants, especially on the defensive side of the ball. But
loudly,
it felt like nothing was ever coming out publicly from his side, and I respect that.
And we should say it's not an uncommon thing for head coaches to sort of pull the reins back. Dan Campbell did it. He was very transparent about it. He said, no, I think our best chance to win is me doing this. He did it for a while and said, nope, I'm wrong. It's not our best chance to win. I'm going to hand the play sheet back. It's not uncommon in NFL circles. It's not a death knell for Kafka's career at all. This happens up and down, especially when a head coach has a specialty. Dable is an offensive guy. That's why he was hired. It's natural to think at some point for him to think, I could do this a little bit better. I can give us a better chance to win. But also with the sort of reset and time and space of the offseason to hand it back and say, hey, we learned some lessons. Here you go. Sure, I'll be watching, but, don't think of it as a short leash necessarily. So there's no, trouble in Toyland here. It's just, this is a very natural NFL thing between head coaches and coordinators.
And also, if you're listening at home, just think about how your own workplace works. Sometimes when you're struggling, your boss rolls up the sleeves and kind of gets in the mud with you to figure shit out. That's how I interpret it. It's just a boss helping out the person under them.
Yep, I would agree with that. DC, we spent some good time on Shane Bowen, came over obviously from the Titans, doing that role for the past 3 years in Tennessee. Special teams is Michael Gabriel. Notable coaches on offense. Mike Groh, wide receivers coach, very experienced wide receivers coach, was the Eagles OC for 2 years, is the son of longtime coach, head football coach Al Groh, who was at Virginia.
I was wondering if that was
Mike is Al's boy. Okay. But Mike in his own right has worked with some very successful receivers in the NFL. He was the receivers coach in Chicago when it was Brandon Marshall and Alshon Jeffrey. He was in Indianapolis. He's worked with Michael Pittman Jr. So he has a strong history of turning out effective passing games. Very experienced coach for Brian Dable to have on his staff. Again, is working at a lower level as a position coach, having been a coordinator. Tim Kelly, the same way, the tight ends coach, spent 4 seasons as an NFL OC, split between the Texans, 3 years there, and the Titans, 1 year there as an OC. And again, is a position coach for the tight ends. So a lot of experience up and down on this staff. And shout out to Angela Baker, who is the offensive assistant for the Giants, whom we interrupted during a tight end position group meeting she was leading at Shrine Bowl. Accidentally.
She is no nonsense.
Yes. So if you're listening,
looks could kill, man.
Oh, we'd both be
I've
dead.
I've never felt smaller in my life than when we walked in to grab a light, and I looked over and she was running a meeting, and I was like, "Oh, I'm getting the fuck out of here."
Right. So, Angela, if you're listening, our apologies.
We're sorry.
We didn't know you were in the room. We were getting to use that room as storage, which was also extremely handy. So shout out to the Shrine Bowl staff for arranging that, but we overlapped without knowing it. And we walked in, looked over. She said to me, "Really?" And I was like, "Oh God, I'm so sorry. I know you put up with a lot. We are not going to add on to that. We're just going to grab our stuff and go." So our apologies, Angela. She's a heck of a football coach. And Dave
also,
was
the command she had in that room, I want to say, like,
oh, that room was focused,
we're
quiet.
Locked in.
Yeah, they were learning. She is a tremendous young football coach. So didn't mean to make your job any harder, Angela. Defensive special teams, Jerome Henderson, the defensive pass game coordinator and DB coach, 17 years of coaching, was a second-round pick himself out of Clemson by the Patriots in 1991, played in 2 Super Bowls. Andre Patterson, the defensive line coach, called him out last year as well. More than 4 decades of coaching experience, including 19 years in the NFL. And Brian Cox, yes, that Brian Cox, former NFL linebacker, father of Brian Cox Jr., is the assistant DL coach under Andre Patterson. So lots of experience, both just purely from the coaching ranks, players who turned into coaches, bright young coaches on this staff. It's a fun staff. And we said that when Brian Dable got to the Giants. Wow, this is a really interesting mix. He didn't pull just directly from his tree. He's definitely a believer in the diversity of voices approach in the coaching room and believes that makes a stronger staff. And the results speak to that. Again, overachieved in their first year, I would say wildly, and then didn't completely bottom out, even though statistically really looks like they should have last year. It's a credit to the entire coaching staff. You have to hold strong through tough times. It is not easy in NFL rooms when you're losing. And they didn't lose the room, and that's a massive credit to them.
The foundation is there. I think over the last couple of off seasons, they've got the framing up. and 2025 is the drywall. 2026, you're moving in the couch. Like, it's a slow build, but they're doing it, and I think they have the right people in charge for doing it. All right, given all that information, since we're on the topic of the staff and the scheme and personnel changes and everything that we've thrown at you over the last how many ever minutes, it brings us to a segment we like to call the Underdog Top 3, which is every single team, after doing all that info dump, we go through the top 3 values as it comes to fantasy football, at least at the ADPs as of us recording, which these are going to be wildly different by the end of summer. They always are. But we try to use the information that we give you to illustrate why we think these guys are way more valuable than where they're currently going. So we try to give you as informed opinion as we can. Obviously, this is going to change by the time we get to training camp, but it's like May 22nd, so give us a break. All right. We have, normally we do top 3. I kind of gave a bonus on this one just because I think it's also worth talking about. Devin Singletary, he's at RB33, ADP of 111 right now. Tyrone Tracy, he's at RB56, ADP of 179. That's like a late 17th round pick. So you're getting him basically for free. Malik Neighbors, wide receiver 20, ADP of 29. Remember, on Underdog, receivers tend to go super, super, super early. Bonus. Jalen Hyatt is at wide receiver 93, ADP of 213. So essentially he's like undrafted. Mm-hmm. So I want to do a running back discussion. I want to do a receiver discussion. Singletary at RB33 versus Tyrone Tracy at RB56. They're not going to replace Saquon with one of those guys, but, to quote Moneyball, they're trying to replace him in the aggregate. Kind of feels to me like Devin Singletary is going to get a lot of the groundwork. Tyrone Tracy might get a lot of the air work. So it really just depends on, do we want the value or do we want the super, super value? How long are we willing to wait? And then we'll get into the receivers after that. But I want to first get your opinion on the running backs. Are you somebody who's willing to take the safer bet in Singletary, or do you feel like there's a decent chance that Tyrone Tracy, as raw as he is, and he is raw, believe me, he's raw, do you think he might, as the season goes on, encroach more and more into Singletary's role to the point where he's actually the one you want?
I think he's... This is odd. It's almost like we have to draw a graph. So Singletary is a more capable rusher right now than Tyrone Tracy. Tyrone Tracy's not as far behind there as a lot of people think. As a receiver, I think Tyrone Tracy is the equal or better of Devin Singletary, even as a pro. So you've got different strengths or strengths that are spread out over that graph, and they're going to need a diversity of stuff. Like you said, you're going to have checkdowns in this offense. And, you can check it down to Singletary, but I think Singletary is going to get the bulk of the early down runs, and really the bulk of the runs to start with. And, no Eric Gray erasure. Like, I like Eric Gray as well, but I really think he's going to get whatever the percentage of runs that you're splitting with Devin Singletary, because you don't really have bell cow backs in the NFL anymore. But I don't really think they're going to bring in Eric Gray in the passing game pieces. So his piece is going to be the small sort of secondary runs piece. And then when Tracy comes in, they have more running ability than I think a lot of people think if you watch Tyrone Tracy's tape.
Yeah, he had the highest missed tackles forced per attempt in college football, and he was right up there with like Bijan Robinson's number.
Yeah,
he was up there
over
with
4.
Javonte Williams' number when he was at North Carolina, I think is what he came at. Like, he's exceptionally gifted at breaking tackles, and when we say he's raw, it's not that he's raw in terms of he is raw in terms of talent. When people say, oh, he's raw talent, he's extremely physically gifted. But when we say he's raw, it's because there's a lot of runs where I don't know if he knows what he's looking at yet. And in terms of running back footwork and efficiency of movement, sinking his hips, like you watch Blake Corum run and you watch Tyrone Tracy run, it looks entirely different. Tyrone's just kind of wild, crazy legs out there, but it works.
They
right?
get there in a very different way.
Yeah.
But I think as he develops, he's obviously got a jump coming from college to the pros, as do all rookies. But that diversity of skill set, that balance, that teams aren't really going to be keyed off to say, oh, Tyron Tracy's on the field. This is a screen, right? Or a throw. And I think that's going to grow his role later in the year. So if you're, this is really in the weeds for, fantasy football.
Well, good. That's why people listen.
Yeah. If you want early returns, I wouldn't go for Tyron Tracy. If you're looking for somebody to sort of back you up in the second half of the season and cover bye weeks, and by then he might be, I think his role will grow. Not just because he's a rookie developing, but because they're going to see, hey, we can do whatever we want here. Whereas if we bring in Eric Gray, it's a little bit more leaning towards run. Not that Eric Gray can't catch the football, but I think they're looking at Tyron Tracy's ability after the catch or with the ball in his hands to break tackles. And I think that's going to give him some shine with this staff. That's really going to come on I would even say like the later third of the year. So
post-Thanksgiving.
Do you want to wait?
Yeah.
Right? Do you want to wait for him to develop and have him fill out that part of your roster then if you get that deep in the weeds with your roster construction and layering? Or do you need pop right off the top? And if you do, then Singletary's the play.
I think it's the difference between you use Singletary to get you to the playoffs, you use Tyron Tracy to seal the deal.
I hope so.
Right? Which if you're in a big best ball tournament, like Best Ball Mania's how many ever millions of dollars.
Yep.
And, if you get to the dance in the end of the year and we need big numbers to close this thing out, I don't know if you're going to get him from Singletary. You might get him from Tyron Tracy.
By then, yeah.
Also, he's going to be a dynamic kick returner and might get you some points just from kickoff touchdowns because he is built for the new return structure for kickoffs.
Very useful football player. A lot of fun to watch. I would not call him typical or traditional.
Very... Is unique the right word for him as a prospect, considering his background, his talents?
Yeah, where he came from, his position switch, the whole bit. And then what really surprised me was his running ability. You would expect as a former receiver, he can catch the ball well and that he's got good size and whatever else. And then I got to the missed tackles per attempt number, and I was like, wait, is that right?
0.41? What?
Is he the top in this class? And he was.
Yeah.
And then I was like, okay, hold on. Because, yeah, you do see the rawness, but you also see the results. And you're like, well, just because he didn't get there the way a running back coach might tell him to get there, he still got there.
Yep.
Against top quality talent. So
my comp for him was Cordarrelle Patterson, but after Patterson finally made the switch full-time to running back.
And figured it out.
It's he's the same thing, except he's doing the switch now instead of 5 years into his career.
Yeah.
So
feels like it.
I think arrow's pointing up. All right, receiver. Yeah, we normally do underdog top 3, but I couldn't resist this. So Malik Neighbors is going as wide receiver 20 because clearly he's going to be the number 1 on that team. If you're just looking at who's there, obviously he should be the number 1 on that team. So he's going as wide receiver 20, ADP of 29. So he's going early third round if you're in a 12-team league, late third round if you're in a 10-team league. Jalen Hyatt's going as wide receiver 93.
Yeah.
So in a 10-team league, he's going to the 21st round. I still think, even if Malik is getting the most targets, getting the most catches, if we're just talking about big play, explosive touchdowns, might only catch 2 balls, but he ends up with 85 yards and a touchdown, especially in best ball format. But I still think there's enough room for Jalen Hyatt to eat that he should not be wide receiver 93.
My problem with that situation is not that I don't like Hyatt. I love Hyatt. You know that. My problem is everything we just said about scheme and the fact that Daniel Jones is still leading the team. It's not that Daniel Jones can't throw the deep ball. He can. He's got a beautiful deep ball when he gets a chance to stand upright and uncork it.
The 2 times a game when he's not on his back, yeah.
Here's the thing. The 2 times a game when he's not on his back, and only one of those might be targeted to Hyatt.
Yeah.
Right? And he might catch it, he might drop it. He's got good hands, but, if it's a contested catch, that's a low percentage throw. It's a low percentage completion. It's just opportunity. Right? He's not going to get that many opportunities. This staff's not going to open it up. We don't think. We just said not going to be a lot of 4 verts, right? So he's not going to have multiple downs on the field, and he may or may not be covered. And you just sort of distill all that out to like how many clean shots is Jalen Hyatt getting down the field in this offense versus another offense. So this is the classic. If you took Jalen Hyatt and put him in an offense where they have a more down the field passing game, I would be way higher on him. I'm not low on Hyatt the player. I'm low on Hyatt's chances within this offense the way we think it's going to be structured.
So if you had to choose, you would rather just say, I'll do Malik Neighbors at wide receiver 20 because I know that the chances of him actually being the featured guy are way higher.
I think he gets a lot more targets. And again, Malik Neighbors, I had a higher grade on than Hyatt.
I hope you did.
Was the most explosive player as at the wide receiver position in this draft. I don't think he was the best wide receiver, but he was easily the most explosive, and I don't think that's really up for debate. I also don't think he's really well cast as a number one, but unfortunately, with where they picked him and with where the roster construction is, he's the de facto number one. Everybody's going to think he's the number one. Everybody's going to expect him to do all the number one things right away. And when he doesn't, because it's not really his game, there's going to be some grumbles about what did we do picking this guy in the top 10. He's a great football player. He would be an elite, and I mean like top 10 in the NFL within a couple of years, number two.
I liken him a lot to Devonta Smith, right? So Devonta Smith went to the Eagles, again, similarly, very high pick. I would even say a similar skill set.
In some ways,
in terms of explosiveness, in terms of deep ball tracking ability. Like, they're not entirely the same. I thought Devonta Smith was way better against press man coverage, but like you can, if you squint, you can kind of see it, right?
You can do that.
But even as good as Devonta is, it really took them bringing in a true X receiver like A.J. Brown to unlock Devonta as your slot, your Z, your guy that you move around.
I think it's maximize, right?
Yeah, it's probably a better word.
Because like he was unlocked before. He's always been a good football player with a great skill set, but it becomes a problem for the defense of what do you do now?
Yeah.
Right? When you have Malik at number one and you can double him and bracket him and, try and keep the top on his speed.
And you know that they can't put him outside as much because he's not as good against press. So he kind of has to be in the slot.
So you can build a box around him
Yeah.
and limit his effectiveness. But if you bring in, let's just say an A.J. Brown type, it's not A.J. Brown, but the Giants don't have that. And the Giants fans' expectations for a guy you picked in the top 10 at wide receiver is he does it all.
A.J. Brown.
Right? He does it all. So, again, not this year. This is where we say 2024 is one thing and 2025 is different and hopefully better for the Giants. If they do find that alpha threat, either in the draft or through trade or whatever else, then it becomes the problem for the defense of, oh, shit, what do we do about Malik Neighbors? Because we can't double him all the time now because we've got A.J. Brown type on the other side that we really do need to double all the time, because if we don't, he's just going to end up with 10 or 11 catches, 130 yards, and 2 touchdowns, and we're going to lose that way. So now you got to pick your poison, and Malik will kill you in those situations. Mm-hmm. He did at LSU, right? Because you couldn't leave Brian Thomas Jr. alone, right? You couldn't leave either one of them alone.
Yeah, because Thomas was the one who they put... Again, Malik spent most of his time inside.
Yeah. So then it's damned if you do, damned if you don't. Yeah. And right now... it's damned if you don't put him in a box, but if you do put him in a box, I think we're going to see some limited effectiveness, again, because of the structure of the offense, how many shots they're going to take, and a defense's ability to say, Darius Slayton doesn't scare us that much. Allen Robinson doesn't scare us. Like Jalen Hyatt only scares us 3 times a game. We can probably live with that. We can get away. We can single him up, and if our pass rush gets home, it doesn't matter anyways. Like there are ways to get around all those players. But if you have Malik as a number one, there's a way to get around him defensively. If you have him as a number two with a good number one, you're screwed.
I think, and again, I know some Giants fans are going to make it sound like we're not, or that we're down on Malik Neighbors. We're not down on Malik Neighbors.
We just want him used in the best possible way.
He needs to be used in a particular way, and he can be an alpha, but he has to be an alpha from a certain spot, right? It's different than Rome Odunze or Marvin Harrison Jr., in my opinion. I know you see Marvin differently than I do, where you can put them outside and you can force the one-on-one. Like there are ways with formations and motions that you can force a one-on-one to a receiver that is lined up outside. And if they're really good against press coverage, like you can force that matchup, right? it's a lot harder to force a one-on-one for a receiver that's in the slot, which is where I think, again, that's where I think Malik is best at, is in the slot. There's a lot more ways for a defense to handle a slot receiver. If we're talking about east-west brackets and all that. So, again, I think he can be ultra productive. I think he can be an extremely good receiver in the league. It's just a narrower role, and they're going to have to figure out, how best to maximize him in that role. I don't know, honestly. I don't think they would have taken him unless they had a plan to do it.
Yeah.
I know it sounds negative, but we're just trying to talk through skill set and role here. I still think wide receiver 20 is perfectly fine with me, but I just want people to have a better understanding of what he actually is.
Yeah, I'm fascinated to see if Mike Kafka pulls early Tyreek with the Chiefs influences, because that's where Kafka came from.
Oh yeah, you put him at number 3. You're running the high cross with that little stair step in it, right? Like,
we're gonna see it, and I'm excited for that, because
you
that's
have
where
to.
he's
You
gonna
have
eat.
to try.
Yeah, that's where he's gonna eat, and I just hope again the protection's a little bit better, because Daniel Jones can throw that, right? And Malik can absolutely run it. That's clear as day. So I think that might be a solid part of the plan. I hope it is, because that would make for some exciting football.
And I think, not to get too deep into the weeds, but I know people like this. I think that's where Hyatt's value might come from for that one shot a game, is if they start going 3-by-1, let's say they put the corpse of Darren Waller as like the isolated receiver backside. Right?
Yeah.
And then you got Malik at number 3, you got Hyatt at number 2, and I don't know, whoever else at number 1 outside, right? So now you got 2 guys that are extremely explosive right next to each other. Mm-hmm. There's certain coverages that you really don't want to play, because you don't want to get a bad matchup on Malik running that deep cross from number 3. So you kind of feel like you have to run, those poach looks where the safety's coming down on it from over the top. Well, if your weak side safety is coming down on that crosser from Malik Neighbors from over the top, that means there is nobody in the middle of the field. So if you're running a cross of Malik and a deep post with Hyatt, and you're having Jalen Hyatt run to grass,
Pick your poison.
as long as Daniel Jones survives for 3 seconds, like, he can throw that.
Oh yeah.
There's your big Jalen Hyatt play, like once per game.
Trust me, I hope. I really like Jalen Hyatt as a player. And again, I think he would be deadly as a number 3 in this offense. Mm-hmm. I mean, if you have, again, A.J. Brown type, let's just say all-around X type, who is a true X and is drawing that type of coverage and attention, and you have Malik in the slot and you have Hyatt outside,
It can work.
good night. Like,
It can
not
work.
only can it work, it would be very hard to defend.
You just need to pass protect. That's all.
Yeah.
Which I guess has been kind of the thing for how many years now? It's like, this can work. They just have to hold up.
Yep.
You just got to block Micah Parsons for 3 seconds. Oh, is that all?
You had to bring that up.
All right, let's get to free agency. Let's talk about a very active March that they had. A bunch of guys that were on the roster that are no longer on the roster. But I think, again, kind of a reflection of where the roster was. Not really sad to see any of these guys go.
Dory Jackson, they had high hopes for at corner. He played 70% of the snaps for them. Looks like that experiment is over for now. Could be back with the team, hasn't signed yet. Justin Pugh, the left guard, has had storied the right word? I don't know. Lengthy, yeah, tenure with the Giants. 70% of the snaps. He's not back. Sterling Shepard, a name that's very popular to Giants fans, didn't play a lot for them in his 31. Didn't bring him back. Again, lots of names. We're not going to talk about all these names. We'll list them on the screen so you can see them. But the ones that really matter, Ben Bredesen, the left guard, is with the Buccaneers. He played 91% of their snaps, so that's something they're going to have to replace. Saquon Barkley is the big one. Moves down, across, I guess, to go to Philadelphia.
That's a sore subject. I didn't want to bring it up too often, but Giants fans, how you feeling?
Oh, I think we know.
How you guys doing, man?
They were loud about that. He says he's reinvigorated, feels great.
Oh, gut punch.
Yeah, gets to run behind that line in Philly. If I was Saquon, I'd be happy about it. If I was a Giants fan, I'd probably be pretty sad about it. Tyrod Taylor stays in the same stadium, but plays for a different team now. Goes from the Giants to the Jets. Xavier McKinney was the big one. Signed a massive deal to go to the Packers. Played extremely good football at the safety position for the Giants last year. There's really no way to replace him. He was one of the top 3 or 4 deep safeties in the league last year, and that's why he got the deal he got. A'Shaun Robinson heads down to the Panthers. Had a limited role for them in terms of snaps, but they were very specific snaps. He was there for a reason, to sort of crush and set the edge. Did that very, very well. Jihad Ward heads to the Vikings. About 60% of the snaps, which was a little higher than I thought he was probably going to get from them. And that's a lot of snaps to replace. But again, you've got Shane Bowen coming in, different system, different rotation of guys. I think they've got a plan to do that. Again, none of those names besides Saquon, for obvious reasons.
Yeah, he's the one exception where you're like, oh man, that sucks.
Yeah, he's not really replaceable, even kind of in the aggregate. He's a special football player. He's moved on. Again, they know how they're going to replace him, but you don't really replace him.
It's interesting how, the running back discussion has evolved, where it's like, running backs aren't important. Don't take running backs high. Don't pay running backs. But then, like, when you lose Saquon, you're like, oh, shit. How are we going to run the ball?
I can't find that out in the pool. I can find 80% of that. I can find, 2 guys that I can sort of glue together that might cost the same in terms, but it's 2 roster spots, not 1. Like, there are ways to do it, but there are very few guys like Saquon Barkley, and those are the ones, if you're going to draft a running back anywhere near high, not as high as you used to. I think the thought of a running back going number 1 overall is like, most fans would be like,
if a running back is going 1 overall, it means that it's a really bad draft class.
Yeah, Andy throws, Andy punts.
Yeah.
But no, I think those days are gone, but there are those few backs, and it's always an argument about, is this guy one of those?
Yeah, there's, in any given year, 5 of them, maybe. And that's, being generous.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk about retentions and third-party additions, but shorter retention list for obvious reasons. But Isaiah Simmons is back and Isaiah Hodgins is back. The 2 Isaiahs, those are probably the two biggest names to pay attention to there. Or, if you're a Gunnar Olszewski fan.
Shout out to Carter Coughlin.
Coughlin's back.
We interviewed him at Shrine.
Carving out a career.
Yeah.
Already, in the upper 20s.
Right.
Let's go. And then third-party additions. Jordan Phillips, who I mentioned, just giving themselves more beef on the defensive line so that they can run nickel as much as we think they're going to run nickel, and also dime. I think they were like 3rd in dime last year. So, when you're in the 2-3-6 dime, you kind of need 2 big-ass DTs to make it work, and he qualifies. Aaron Stinney they brought in to be probably their swing guard. John Runyon is going to be a starter for them at guard. Jermaine Illuminor presumably is going to be the other starter for them at guard, so they kind of remade their guard room.
Trio.
Call it that. They also brought in Devin Singletary, like we mentioned, and Brian Burns, the big addition, traded for him with I think it was a second rounder, a pick swap in the 5th, and then a 2025 5th on top of that, if I recall correctly. And then, of course, they gave him $28 million a year. So, pretty big investment, but I will say, I think the reason they did it, and no disrespect to the other edges on the team, but none of them were getting it done at a high enough clip that with the structure of the defense that we think they're going to run, where it's like 1 true edges on the field, none of them were good enough to be like the 1 true edge you have on the field. Like, and I know people say, it's the scheme. That's why the pass rush win rate was so low. Well, if you just look at 4-man rushes, like just straight 4-man rushes, the Giants' edge rusher trio last year, really, with Kayvon and B.J. Ojulari, were ranked dead last and second to dead last in pass rush win rate in the entire NFL. So even on just normal go hunt the quarterback looks, they weren't getting it done. They wouldn't have done this Brian Burns deal if they were getting it done, because only one of them's going to be on the field on most of these downs and distances anyway. So I think that kind of told you what they think. I think they think Kayvon is the rotation guy that's given Burns a breather. And that's fine. Like, I think he can be really good in that role, but he's not Brian Burns.
Yeah, and we have to give a huge shout out to the Panthers front office for absolutely bungling the Brian Burns deal.
God, they fucked that one up.
Because otherwise he wouldn't have been available. They went from a period of 12 months of being offered 2 number ones for him to getting 1 number 2. Not ideal, Panthers, but the Giants are the beneficiary.
Yeah, it's a really good deal for them because they needed it. Like, they absolutely needed it. Yeah. And again, I don't dislike Kayvon as a player, but we're just being realistic about what the role is here, right? And I think they upgraded at that spot. All right, brings us to the draft. Really good draft class. Draft that EJ and I liked quite a bit. I do think that them not going quarterback is telling, because, like we said, they're kind of building the roster first and then getting the quarterback later. I don't think they have a whole lot of belief in Daniel Jones at this point. There have been reports that they don't have a whole lot of belief in Daniel Jones at this point. And so, at the time, we're like, okay, they passed on J.J. McCarthy, they passed on Michael Penix, they passed on Bo Nix. Like, they didn't try to do like a sneaky little trade down and then grab somebody, around in like that 9 to 11 area. They just straight up were like, no, we're taking a receiver. And some people were like, all right, but the quarterback class next year, we're not thinking is super hot. So what's the plan, right? Before we get into the draft class as a whole, I just kind of want to put this out there. Dak might be the plan. Like, because it's kind of looking like Dak's not going to be a Cowboy in 2025. He's got to go somewhere. They can kind of get out of the Daniel Jones deal. I don't know. Kind of feels like they're building a structure not for Daniel Jones. Kind of feels like they're building it for Dak. Am I crazy?
No, and then I want Jalen Hyatt bad.
Oh, yeah. No.
Like, at that point,
Hyatt's who you take in Dynasty right now.
Can I buy future stock? I can if I'm in Dynasty. Yeah, that would change their outlook significantly and for the better. Would also be fun against a division rival. Let's not say it's not. I don't think you're crazy at all.
Well, looking at the rest of the draft class, beyond Malik Nabers, who we talked about a lot, beyond Tyrone Tracy, we talked about a lot. Pretty hard to find a pick that I don't like here. I know it wasn't a huge draft class because, again, they made the trade for Brian Burns, but for all 6 picks, I think they went 6 for 6.
Yeah, there's 3 I really like and 3 I'm okay with. There's none I really dislike. There are none where I'm like, what are you doing? Too early, wrong fit, whatever else. So Malik Nabers, love the pick. Again, it's a choice, but I don't dislike the choice. If you're not going to pick a quarterback, and again, 6 went in the first 12, would have been a reach by 6 if you'd stayed and not traded up. They just decided that's not the kind of emphasis we want to put on the position right now. Tyler Nubin, the safety from Minnesota in the second round at 47, I love. Was my safety 1 in this draft. To get that guy middle of the second round is great for the Giants. They needed to replace a high-profile player that left in free agency. They did as well as they possibly could have in this draft. Love that. So 2 for 2, very strong start. Then we get to Andrew Phillips, not a player I dislike. It felt a little early to me, 3rd round.
Really? That's later than I thought he would go.
That's a lot of people were higher on him, and he is a shorter stature player who is energy all over the place. Will have his nose in anything. I see him more as a nickel, and that's not a slap. I think that's his true and best position. I'm not wild about him in coverage down the field. I really like his game near the line of scrimmage, and a lot of people were higher on him than I was. We'll see how he works out. Again, I don't dislike the pick. It was the first one where I went, Again, I was like, Malik Nabers, love it. Tyler Newman, love it. Andrew Phillips, I can see it. Like, it's fine. I'm not like, oh, you picked the wrong guy or that's 2 rounds too early or anything else. There were other players I probably would have picked that were available on the board, but that's fine. That's very common in the draft. Theo Johnson, same thing, the tight end out of Penn State. They saw more out of him than I did. 4th round, 107. I don't dislike it. I think he's their succession plan. They hope he develops for next year. Again, 2025. That's the theme for this episode. And we'll see. What were you going to say about Theo?
Oh yeah, my face lit up just because I loved that pick.
I know.
Like, if you're looking at Theo Johnson, the athletic profile, it's a dead ringer for Jimmy Graham, folks. I'm not saying he's going to be Jimmy Graham, but like, if anybody could finally take the mantle of like super athletic tight end that, you know, rips the seams wide open. You know, Darren Waller was supposed to be that for them, and you know, Darren Waller did Darren Waller things and wasn't on the field. But if anybody could do that, I think at this point in Waller's career, if anybody on the roster could do that, it's Theo Johnson. He is a very, 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 very rare athlete. One of the most athletic tight end prospects ever. Like, ever. And the movement skills are evident. You know, he's good against press coverage. He's got good contested catch skills. Does fuck all as a blocker, but I don't think he's there for that.
Nope.
Like, I love that pick. So I know you're kind of like, okay, fine, whatever. But for me, I think he's their answer for that tight end type that they tried to get with Waller. He's their answer for that type for the future, because I think they know at this point, like, you know, Waller's probably not that.
Yeah, and the 4th round made that midline for me. I was fine. If they'd done it in the 2nd, I would have been like, oh, that's a reach. If they'd got it in the 6th, I would have been like, holy cow, what's he still doing on the board? 4th was like, okay, that's your guy, that's your choice. Again, don't dislike it. This is not I said at the top, there are no picks in here that I'm like, oh, that's terrible.
Yeah.
It's just like, all right, Tyrone Tracy, loved that pick. 5th round, 166. We've already talked about him and his variety of skills quite a bit. And then Darius Musa, the linebacker from UCLA, way down in the 6th at 183 overall. Again, if it works, cool.
Yeah, special teams.
Yep. If you like it and you think he's going to develop in your system and you like the player and the person, great. Again, it's a 6th round pick for a linebacker. Like, don't hate it, don't love it. So 3 picks I really loved here: Malik, Tyler, and Tyrone Tracy. And 3 picks I was okay with.
Brings us to undrafted free agents and the haul they got. Honestly, this is one of the few UDFA classes in all the NFL this year where I watched none of them. Like, none of them.
Yeah, I only watched 2, and it's the only UDFA class so far that I've come across. Again, I've only written half the agendas, but that's 16, 17 teams at this point, where I didn't highlight any of them.
And we watch hundreds of guys every year.
Yeah.
And, you know,
I watched a couple of these guys.
I didn't do the Wyoming receiver.
Oh, he was one of the guys I did.
I did like 45 receivers. I was like, he wasn't one of them. I didn't do the West Florida receiver. You know, I watched. It's funny how much North Dakota State I watched. I never charted like Jake Kubas ever. So it's like I watched games where these guys played in, but I never took notes on any of them. And I think this is going to be one of the only UDFA halls in the entire league where I watched none of them.
Yeah, I watched 2 of them and didn't highlight either one of them. Doesn't mean they're not going to be good players. Doesn't mean some of these guys aren't going to make the roster. They probably are. Just because we didn't watch them doesn't mean they're bad. It just means we didn't have familiarity with them. And it also means that the Giants front office just sees things a little bit differently than we did, because there's a huge pool of players, again, many of whom we'd watched that were available after the draft that weren't selected in the top 7 rounds. They see or prioritize different things than we do. Because, again, there's guys at all these positions that we were like, man, this guy's available, and this guy's... They didn't pick any of those. In fact, they picked none of those, which is, again, the only team in the NFL that did that. So the way Joe Shane's scouts see talent at these positions is different than the way you and I do, like, significantly. There's no overlap.
With all that said, brings us to our final couple segments here. We do a summary, I guess you could say. We're distilling the report card segment down to a single measure: thumbs up, thumbs down, or thumbs even. It's literally just a top line answer to the question: did they get better? Did they get worse? Or through all the additions and subtractions, are they roughly the same? I think thumbs up. They might They might end up with a similar record, but when I say thumbs up, it's more thumbs up for 2025 than it is for 2024. I just think it's a reflection of the roster is better. The quarterback situation, still not good. The win situation, probably still not going to be good. But the roster is healthier. I think the franchise is in a healthier spot for the future, which ultimately I think is all Giants fans care about.
Yeah, I also went thumbs up because of the sort of turn in roster building and, if anything, kind of the realization. People were saying, oh, they're not going to pick a quarterback. They could have picked a quarterback this year. Their owner gave them permission, famously and publicly. If you want to pick a quarterback this year, you go right ahead. They decided not to. And again, they decided to take this approach. I, too, think it's healthier for the long term. No shortcuts right now in building the roster. They've obviously been given the time and the leeway to do that, which is also healthy from a team building perspective. So I give a thumbs up for that. In terms of the 2024 performance, we'll talk about that in a minute, but they're going to have a tough time overcoming Daniel Jones. I'm just going to call him shortcomings at this point. He has holes in his game. They haven't filled in. If they're going to win, they're going to do it the way they did 2 years ago, which is, again, sort of taking the air out of the ball, taking the ball out of his hands for a lot of throws and saying, here are your choices, and we're going to be running the heck out of you as well. So if Daboll and his staff can get it done, they'll probably do it a similar way. They'll stand a decent chance. They'll be in, win team. We'll talk about.
They'll be competitive, but,
right.
Maybe.
Again, it's really the eye towards what does it look like in 2025 if, no matter how they do it, how they address the quarterback position.
Well, let's talk about ceiling and floor in wins. For me, I put the floor as their win total last year, which is 6, because they bottomed out last year. I don't think they're worse now, so the floor is probably the same, which is 6. Ceiling, I struggled with, do I think they can be an over 500 team? I mean, maybe. Like, the schedule isn't crazy, but it's not easy. They play the AFC North, so they got to deal with Cincinnati, they got to deal with Baltimore, they got to deal with Pittsburgh. They play against the Colts. That's not an easy game. Playing against Tampa, that's not easy. I'm pretty sure they play against Minnesota, which that's week 1, so we'll see what the quarterback situation is in Minnesota. But they got a bunch of talent too. It's not smooth sailing in terms of opponents. So I put their ceiling at 8. I think a lot of Giants fans, even if they really want to see a winning team, I think they'll understand that this is a process year. This is not a results year. I think they'd be okay with that. Honestly, Giants fans, I think, would just settle for being watchable. I think they'll at least be watchable, which, better than we can say for some other Giants teams in past years.
Yeah, I'm going to put their ceiling at 9, which is the ceiling they hit 2 years ago in the improbable year. Again, if Daniel Jones stays healthy, yes, they don't have Saquon, but they do have more around the edges. And honestly, I think it's less about the offense. If the offense can be what it was 2 years ago, which is still limited, but effective, and Bowen can bring the defense up, specifically bring the rush defense up from 29th and the points allowed from 26th, if he can just move those up into the teens and have a midline defense, the offense is going to steal some. They are going to be better, again, with presumed health for the quarterback, which is always how we do these ceilings. I think they could get back to that 9 in a somewhat different way, but just not having to try and keep up and always being, quote unquote, behind the sticks or behind on the scoreboard, quite frankly. So if Bowen does a decent job of stabilizing the defense, the offense comes back to that level a couple of years ago, I think they could get back to 9 wins. That's the absolute ceiling for me. The floor is, I want to say 6, I really do, but I'm going to say 5. Again, that would be injuries. That would be Bowen's defense not gelling, them getting behind not only on the scoreboard, but in the standings. Not a team that's built to come from behind either in the long term or the short term. So I don't think if the coaching staff was going to lose the locker room, would have been last year.
Yeah.
I don't see them losing a locker room. I don't see them losing faith from ownership outside of something completely extraordinary, which I just don't see happening. But again, schedule's tough. They are going to have to come out. If the offense, is slow as we think it might be and the defense sputters, losses could rack up early. Could they again develop and make a late run? That's typically more something you see from a team that maybe, brought in a new offensive coordinator and didn't gel till the second half. That's not the case here, where they have a rookie quarterback who's learning his lessons in the second half of the season. That's not the case here either. So if they lose some early, it maybe the floor is 5.
Well, I hope we sufficiently waffled enough for you Giants fans. I don't want to say we're tiptoeing on eggshells, but we kind of are, right? We're trying not to get your hopes up, but we're also trying to make you excited for the season. We're also trying to be realistic. We're also trying to be optimistic. It's a hard team to talk about. It's a hard team to talk about.
For 2024 it is. And it's hard not to get excited about next year because this is the 2024 preview. 2025 one we think will look very different, but this is a team that is not building for this year. There's, someone famously said, not every team is trying to win the Super Bowl every year. The Giants are not trying to win the Super Bowl this year.
So just kind of be patient, stick it out. You can still enjoy your Sundays this year. Maybe spend a couple of them golfing if you're going up against like the Ravens. That's a golf day. All right. I know it's late in the year, but yeah, you should be on the course for that one. I don't think it's going to go well. But still, try to have fun with this season. I want to thank Giants fans that stuck around this late. I want to thank people that are non-Giants fans for sticking around this late. Go check out our clothing partner, Homage, if you are a Giants fan, because they have a bunch of Giants gear. They actually have a bunch of gear for every single team because they have the NFL license. They also carry bootleg gear. And regardless of what you choose to buy, whether it's something for the Giants or if you're a division rival watching this, you want to get something for the Eagles, something for the Cowboys, or you want to get bootleg gear, whatever you choose to buy, add our link in the description below. We get a cut of it. So, buying from them and supporting your team also directly supports our team, and we appreciate that from you guys. Also want to thank our patrons, especially in the executive producer tier. Couldn't do this without you guys either. They've been the most loyal bootleggers out of them all for several years at this point. So thank you guys as well. We'll be back tomorrow talking more Saquon Barkley because it's the Eagles episode. Giants fans, you might want to skip that one because it's not going to be easy to listen to for you guys, but if you do come back because you're masochists, we appreciate you all the same. So, see you guys tomorrow.